Good evening, everyone. Welcome to our January 14th meeting of the Addison Central School District Board. I guess I will officially call us to order, and we'll do just a quick round of introductions. Suzanne, if you would begin, please.
Suzanne Buck.
Davina Desmarais.
Mary Cullinane.
Mary Gill.
Peg Martin.
Victoria Jetty.
Peter Burrows, Superintendent.
Peter Conlon.
Lorraine Morse. Jory Jacobite.
James Malcolm.
Jen Newcedar.
Vicki Wells, Assistant Superintendent of Student Services.
All right. It's time on the agenda for public comment. I see mostly we have administrators here. Is there public comment? You wouldn't mind, Barb, just introducing yourself again.
Barb Carly Salisbury, retired teacher, retired school wife, media specialist for moms. And I just wanted, in looking at the budget and knowing that you're still in the preliminary stages, I was just wondering if I could have an update on the library media specialist position at moms, considering the one-year waiver.
Yeah, I think that's fine if you wouldn't mind providing an update.
Sure. So as you know, we applied for and received a one-year waiver, and as we build our budget, we have not submitted a waiver, so our plan is to fund that position as needed based on the enrollment.
So you would be looking at the enrollment of the previous year?
I'll be working with the agency on that.
Okay. All right. Anything further? If not, could I have a motion to approve the minutes of January 7th?
Second.
Second, Mary. Any comments, changes?
I have one
Yes,
comment.
please.
It's really a matter of form. Under report of the board, section E, Finance Committee, and I give my remarks, and I have no question with those. Then there's a paragraph change, and it says, suddenly maintain current level of services, address loss of, and I think if we're going to have somebody who is noted as making remarks specifically about a specific situation, then there either should be some delineation or someone else should be noted that made those particular. Otherwise, I reading this can't determine whether I said those things.
Where is it? Sorry, you were going too fast. I couldn't keep up with
Report of the board, section E, the first paragraph is fine, Finance Committee, and I prefaced the discussion on the budget. And then this next paragraph is maintain current level of services. And then the paragraph after that is attributed to Brittany, went over what we know about. So I just felt that it was confused as to who is. I can understand saying there would be board discussion and not necessarily attributing whatever that is to some specific person. But if we're going to attribute it, then we should make sure that what follows isn't unclear as to who's saying it. That's my only point. I wasn't saying that any of the information was wrong. It's a matter of form.
Was that the paragraph you're referring to? Was that I can't remember. Was that you or was that discussion?
That was discussion. Because the minute says the Finance Committee feels comfortable about the current proposed budget, and that I think was sort of the way I ended my particular remarks. So it's.
All right. Good. If we could just,
I know these are small, but I do think.
I think that attribution is important for each paragraph. If the paragraph is summing up what people or a person has said. So maybe you could just say something like, begin that paragraph with board discussion ensued around, and then go into that. Yes.
I recall just talking with Perry as we developed the board operational policies, that minutes came up as do we need to talk about how we take minutes, and as they built the agenda setting, how do I get something on the agenda, something like that. So that may be something for the board to consider, just in terms of, there are lots of different ways to take minutes. For everyone to come together at some work session and talk about that might be helpful.
Like I bring this up at times, but that's when I read them.
Yep. All right, thank you. With those changes mentioned, all those in favor of approving the minutes, say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed?
I'm recused. I wasn't here.
And we have one recusal, or abstention.
Abstention? Not recused, okay.
Since we just had a week, do we have bills?
Yes, there were bills today. Victoria and I read them. Total number from the district funds, $239,275.38. Payroll expenses, $13,963.03 for a total of $253,238.48. I move that we pay the bills.
Second?
Moved and seconded that we pay the bills as read. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, done. Now on to the big item.
All right. So we brought copies. These are hot off the press. We have been wrangling with the AOE for a week since we last met, and our number has changed 3 times. Yeah,
Since we last met.
since we last met. So I think we're in a pretty good place right now. Feel pretty confident enough to move forward and put warnings in front of you today. So I have, the information is in board pack. I also have some copies for folks in the audience and for those that want a paper copy. Anyone else want a paper?
No, thank you. Sure. I'll take that though.
Okay.
Yeah. What? Librarian's name? Bob Carly.
Did they say that the number was not going to change again, or have you not, have you?
Would they be so rash?
What did Brad say today?
It's not final. Our census data is certified. So it means that any changes that we would see would be as a result of the equalization ratio, which we'll talk about a little bit later. They would be small changes. What we were missing in our previous data was some census information about poverty and ELL, which adds additional weighting to our equalized pupils. So we saw a more substantial increase than I was anticipating. Any changes at this point would not be as a result of missing or incomplete information. It would just be a result of statewide changes as a whole.
And a portion, so that we're going to talk tonight a little bit about school funding in general, just to provide a bit of a primer for how all these different mechanisms work. Some of the equalization ratio has already been applied because people like us, they have all of the census data, so we don't expect that to be a significant shift from where it is now, but that equalization ratio would shift dramatically.
And some of the big districts that were out are now in, like the Burlingtons, like the Rutland cities, that were missing from previous equalization ratios are now.
The bottom line number, though, that you give us a warning for, that we present to the public, doesn't change. Is that true?
Not necessarily. So if our equalized pupil number changes in 2 weeks, I mean, we don't know. I mean, we're going to be well beyond the limitations of our 30 to 40 day window.
Right.
The AOE could come back and say in mid-February, okay, we've now got a final number, and your number is now, instead of 17, what is it right now? Instead of 1798, it's 1799. Okay, so we gained a student. We're still going to have to go forward with our current numbers, and they haven't communicated anything as far as I know yet.
No, so we had a discussion about it at VASBO, and the recommendation is use the number that is most recent and that you think is most reflective of your situation, which is where we are now. So it's true that number could change, but if we wait too long, then will be violating statute by not posting the warning in time.
So the assumption is the warning number is the number
Yeah.
that the public votes on when we make
Yep.
the warning, okay? And then however
That's the
everything
number we're
else fits
approving.
in and
Yep.
how it gets divvied up and spread around is what potentially could change, maybe infinitesimally, but
And it could mean, I don't know how it will work. Peter might know more just from the inside of Montpelier. But the state may have to move revenue around, they may have to shift some things. I'm not sure how they'll make amends in the end.
I just wanted to make sure
Yeah.
that we weren't out
Yeah.
of.
Right.
No, we've been.
The bottom line spending number certainly doesn't change.
No.
It's just the per pupil number
I know.
might go up and down a little bit.
Right, yeah, we've been told to move forward.
Yeah.
And that's the part I'm saying, where we're raising funds for local ed spending, which makes up, 32% or something of the statewide 100%, for education. So the other 70% from non-residential and other revenue sources, some of that in terms of the total revenue pie could shift a little bit at the state level for them to make sure they can fund all schools because the numbers were slightly off. So we have a budget book, and that is in board pack as well, so some of you are already on that. I have a couple copies. A few people suggested or requested copies. Was that you?
I didn't,
Okay. Well, I
but I'll
have-
take one.
Okay. Okay.
So it's still in draft form. It does require a bit more editing, however, what we want to do tonight is go through sort of what kind of information is in the budget book. And we'll talk about that in a few minutes. I don't know where you wanted to start, Peter.
So it's probably good. Yeah, let's start with the PowerPoint and then kind of answer questions at the end.
Can we turn these lights down?
Yeah.
Got it.
Okay, thank you.
You want me to?
I can, yeah, why don't you go ahead? Yeah.
So we wanted to give you a little bit of background about Vermont's education funding system. We have spent some time talking at these meetings. I'm going to stand over here so I'm not in front of the camera. About the complexities of the funding system and how, it has the appearance of being local, but it's really a statewide system, and there's a little bit of confusion about it. So we just wanted to shed some light on that. So some of the history of our funding system is there was a case brought in 1997. It was Brigham versus State of Vermont. And the central focal point of this case was that there were wide disparities in tax burdens due to large differences in property wealth, and that resulted in unequal education opportunities for students based on their residence. So as a result, Act 60 came about, which essentially means that now the state of Vermont funds all public school district budgets approved by voters across the state. So it's a statewide system. And attempts have been made to equalize based on demographics, based on spending, and also based on student population. And as a result of all those changes, Act 68 came about, which is our modified funding formula, essentially, that we're using today. So there are four main pieces in the ed fund. There was revenue transferred from the state general fund. There is non-residential property tax, which is about 41%. General purpose taxes, about 25%, and then the remainder is the homestead property tax. And there are three ways that property taxes are assessed. Our education property taxes are assessed. One is based on property value, another is based on household income, and there can be a combination of both depending on your situation. So this is the formula that we're most familiar with, the homestead property tax formula. This is what we use to project to voters what the effect would be, what the school budget's effect would be on their taxes. So we've gone through this many times. Essentially, you take your expenditures and subtract your local revenues, and that becomes education spending. Education spending is on the warning. So in the expenditures are on the warning. And then you divide your education spending by your equalized pupils, and you get ed spending per equalized pupil. That is also on the warning. In addition, the percent change from the prior year is on the warning of ed spending per equalized pupils. You divide that number by your property yield, and that gives you your equalized tax rate. And then you divide that by your individual town CLA, which gives you your adjusted tax rate. So that's why each town in ACSD can have a different tax rate even though our spending is the same because of the CLA.
And one thing to note, in the Addison Independent article, it stated ACSD grounds itself on budget, and then there was a tag about formal. I think it said 9%.
9% instead of 9 cents.
It was not 9%, it was 9 cent. In the previous draft, this draft is different.
A little better. So what's an equalized pupil? This is like the number that we've been waiting for with bated breath. So the objective of an equalized pupil is to create an average student in terms of cost. So some examples would be weighting up for high school students, weighting down for pre-K students. ELL students get an additional weight, and we also get additional weighting for what they call the poverty ratio. So it's essentially a measure of the number of students that we have on 3-square benefits. And then the equalization ratio, which we talked about, takes into account the statewide ADM. So how it actually works is it's based on a 2-year average of ADM. So we have all these, initials. So ADM is average daily membership. And ADM is a census of resident students that's conducted between the 11th and 30th day of the school year. Then state place students are added to that. And then a 2-year average is taken of ADM, which gives us what is called our long-term ADM. And then our long-term ADM is weighted. So as we talked about before, it's weighted down for pre-K, 0.46. It's weighted up for grades 7 through 12, 1.13, and then there's some additional weighting for ELL and poverty. Then, that weighted total is multiplied by the equalization ratio, which is the actual 2-year state average, so statewide, divided by the weighted 2-year average. So this is lots of fun. You guys aren't like bouncing out of your seats yet, but it gets better, don't worry. So the equalization ratio is really the first mechanism that we see in our funding formula by which the Vermont funding system becomes statewide as opposed to local. And the second mechanism that we'll talk about is the property yield.
Just one quick clarifying question. The equalization ratio is the actual 2-year state average of what?
Of ADM.
Of ADM? Okay.
Divided by the weighted 2-year average.
Average of ADM. Okay.
Long-term ADM.
So this is where, counties like Chittenden, which are growing, help the other counties that are losing students. The equalization ratio would be having kind of a suppressive effect on them.
Right. So if let's just say for a second that your long-term weighted ADM is 100 students and the equalization ratio is 0.94, it brings it down to 94, which is about actually what it is right now.
And of these variables that you've just clarified, what variables are you saying are still in flux?
Equalized pupil.
Okay.
This is all part of equalized pupils.
Uh-huh.
So equalized pupils in general is still in flux because the equalization ratio is in flux.
So the equalization ratio on this is in flux?
Yes. So our census data is certified, but there are other districts and SUs in Vermont that are still waiting on that certification or out for edits.
Okay. And that's why you said because the larger districts are already in, the variance there is going to be minimal.
Yeah.
Okay.
And they've run, my understanding is they've run the equalization ratio for what they have right now.
Yes.
For the census data they do have.
Yep.
I got it.
So where you say weighted total is multiplied by the equalization ratio, is that our weighted total?
Our weighted total.
Is then multiplied by the state equalization ratio.
Right.
Which you would expect to be below 1.0.
Yeah.
Right.
Given declining enrollment across the state.
So for Addison Central in FY19, 34% of our budget was made up of homestead taxes, and then 45 was non-residential, and the remainder was additional funding from the state, like general purpose tax, things like that. It's important to note that non-residential taxes are considered a statewide funding source. So in some cases, your non-residential taxes, they're all sent to the state and then divvied up. It's available for everyone. But only 34% is comprised of our actual homestead property tax. So now let's look at the tax rate calculation as it applies to us. So everything down to that 1.9% education spending hasn't changed from prior versions of the budget. So we haven't made any changes to the budget itself. What's changed is what's below that. So our ed spending per equalized pupil is now at 3.35%. We have actually gained 10 equalized pupils since our last version. So it's one example where I'm very happy to be wrong. 10 students is pretty substantial. It's a big deal, so it benefited us. So now our education spending per equalized pupil is $17,473.81. And just for a reference point, the excess spending threshold is $18,311 for FY20.
And what drove our 10? What?
ELL and poverty.
ELL and poverty.
Yeah. So there was a census that was waiting to be certified. It's actually called the Tuition Student Census. But they also collect some data about ELL and poverty rates on that. So the property yield we've talked about, that's been recommended by the tax commissioner in a December 1st letter. It will actually be set by the legislature in the spring. But right now, it's set at $10,666. So when you divide our ed spending per equalized pupil by the property yield, we get our equalized tax rate. But we have another, ACSD has the incentive rate, so we have another element this year that's added to the tax rate. And if you recall, as an incentive for unification, we get an incentive rate that's applied to the equalized tax rate, and it started at 10 cents and it goes down 2 cents every year. So our revised ACSD tax rate is 0.25% higher than in FY19. And also want to remind you that at this time last year, there was a projection that the revised ACSD tax rate would be about 4 cents higher over FY18, and that was because the yield was projected to be much lower. So if you look at where you thought you were going to be last year to this year, we're actually a decrease, but that's our actual revised ACSD tax rate this year. The property yield was initially projected to be at 98.42, and it was actually set at 10,220 for FY19.
And what's driving the property yield?
So that number is recommended, it's
State revenue, basically.
It's state revenue, so if our ed spending per equalized pupil were equal to the property yield, then our tax rate would be $1. So they look at the whole state system, the whole budget, and all the revenue that's needed to be raised, and do a calculation to determine that. That's, the tax commissioner looks at it, and then based on, I don't know if you remember.
At the base of it, it means that property values have gone up.
Okay.
And
Great.
I don't know if you remember
Statewide.
last year.
Statewide.
Yes, so I don't know if you remember last year, sorry, I lost my train of thought entirely. So last year there was some contention in the between the governor and the legislature about one-time money, and I don't know if you recall any of that, but essentially he didn't want to raise taxes, so he wanted to keep that number high. So that was why the yield changed, essentially. Does that sound right, Peter?
That's different than a property
I
value.
think a lot of it has to do with just
The
the basic.
property value is connected because the property value, when you look at the non-residential and the homestead, that's over 70%. So if the property values are increasing, they're expecting there's more taxes to fund schools. So that's why that yield rate, if property value is increasing, they're going to be able to tax you more and get more money to then increase that yield rate. There's also a bunch of, from what I understand, going into this year, there's a lot of one-time monies and the Amazon cash fall that will also help.
For the tax, okay.
But I think actually what it is as the statewide grand list goes up, you can generate more revenue, or you can generate the same revenue but at a lower tax rate.
Right.
And that, using the formula, makes the yield go up. So the yield going up means that tax rates are going down. But of course, it doesn't necessarily mean, on average, you're still paying the same amount of taxes, just like when Middlebury goes through a reassessment. On average, you're still raising a certain amount of money. It just depends on the rate changes as the values change.
But your property value is increasing, and I think going into this year, my understanding from Governor Scott is that he's looking at investment in early childhood and higher ed. Is that still on the table?
Oh, we just got started, so we don't know if it's on the table yet or not.
Okay.
I don't know if we answered your question, but
Yeah, it's good.
okay. There's a lot to it.
The answer is it's complicated, I think.
Ratio,
Bud.
that's something I didn't know about.
So, I'm sorry for the formatting, I've been struggling with the Weybridge formatting on here. It looks different on the small computer screen than it does when you project it, and I don't know why. So, these are our estimated town tax rates. So in order to project the town tax rates, you take the ACSD tax rate and apply the town CLA, which is the common level of appraisal. So you can see the town tax rates compared to the FY19 actual town tax rates. So it ranges from a very slight decrease in Bridport, and Ripton to about 8 cents in Cornwall. And in Cornwall, that's totally reflective of the CLA decreasing. So prior in FY19 right now, the CLA is over 100, but it's dropping to 95.76 in FY20. So that's the reason for that increase. And then the stars for Middlebury is because they're undergoing a reappraisal. We talked about this last time. It'll be completed in April of 2019. So for estimation purposes, we'll assume a CLA of 100%, which would make the town tax rate equivalent to the ACSD tax rate. Any questions so far?
That sounds like a headline to me.
What?
Middlebury tax rate drops.
27 cents or
Yeah.
something? Yeah. So I just wanted to give a few practical examples of what this actually looks like, or could look like on someone's tax bill. So let's look at a Bridport resident with a $200,000 home value, and let's assume that this taxpayer is paying based on their property value. So their homestead tax rate is $1.59. So in order to calculate how that would play out in their tax bill, you take their home value, divide it by 100, and then multiply it by the tax rate. So that would be $3,180. It looks a lot simpler once you get here. Getting here is what's tricky. So this is the same resident, but let's pretend that they're paying based on income sensitivity. So this is a little more complicated. So the calculation's the same down to ed spending per equalized pupil. So that number still does have an effect on those paying based on income, but that effect is lessened a bit. If you remember, we said that between 60 and 76%, depending on the town, of our residents pay at least partially based on income. They receive some sort of property tax rebate or credit. So you use what's called the income yield. It serves the same purpose as the property yield, and that's set every year. This year, it's projected at $13,104. So instead of dividing your ed spending per equalized pupil by the income yield, by the property yield, you divide by the income yield, and then the base percentage of income is 2%. So you increase 2% by the amount that you got before by dividing your ed spending per equalized pupil by the income yield. And then you multiply that number, which is 2.66, by the income, and that's the amount of credit. That's the amount that they need to pay, so they get a credit based on that. So they get an adjustment of $1,052. I didn't speak it as well as it looks on there. It's really hard to talk through that, but essentially that's how it works. So you get a credit. There's a base percentage of income you have to pay, 2%, then it's increased.
Oh, yeah.
And the last example is the non-residential rate. That's a little simpler. So there is one non-residential rate for the whole state. It's set this year at $1.58. And then you divide that by your CLA, and you get a revised non-residential rate. Then you calculate it the same way that you would, the homestead property tax. Your house site value, or your property site value, divided by 100 times your tax rate. So in this case, actually, it's the same as the homestead property tax rate in this particular example. So.
And there's one, isn't there a hybrid too between?
There is a hybrid, and it's if your house is, if you fall between certain income brackets and your house is valued over $250,000, but it gets even more complicated.
Yeah.
So I just thought that, Peter and I thought that this would be a good example to show you sort of practically how this plays out, and maybe give you more of a sense of what we really have control over and what we don't. And I think the bottom line is that, we have an appearance of a locally funded system, but it's really statewide. So there's a lot of mechanisms that are outside of our control, and we're not suggesting that absolves us of responsibility for having a responsible budget. However, it does, serve to illustrate the fact that sometimes, despite our best laid plans, we'll get tax rate increases.
Can I ask just a quick clarifying, if you go back 2 slides? So this number so this couple is paying $2,128?
Yeah.
And then what, is that whole amount going to ed spending, or that's what they're paying?
That's
And then
just,
a portion of it goes to ed spending?
so that would be just what's based on their education. It's not, has anything to do with their municipal rate.
Yep.
It's just their education spending. So you would take that 3,180 is what they would have paid, just if they weren't paying based on income at the bottom. But because of the adjustment, they're going to get a credit, so they're only going to pay 2,128, but that's all related to education.
So it's $2,128 that's going into the state education funds.
Right.
And that's part of the, I believe that's part of the 32% homestead
Yeah.
that we're collecting, whether
Yep.
it's through income sensitivity
That's right.
or on property.
But it doesn't have anything to do with like the municipal budget or anything like that. I hope that you guys didn't glaze over for that. I know that
Very good, thank you.
it's not the most exciting, but
I couldn't repeat
So are
it.
there any questions?
And is
Are you posting that in board pack?
Yeah, this is.
it's not in board pack, but
When they
I don't
need to
see any
go.
reason that we couldn't
Yeah,
put it in board
yeah,
pack.
yeah,
Okay, great.
yeah. Questions?
So is there any chance that any of the numbers that come in from the state can push us over?
Speak up a little bit, Suzanne.
So what I was asking is there any possibility that any of the numbers that come in later on could possibly push us over that dreaded threshold of?
Right, so the answer to that is no, because the maximum amount that our education spending per equalized pupil, that our equalized pupils can decrease is 3.5% over the prior year. So we do have a floor. So even at, I'll double
We're
check
at
on my
1%,
computer, but
right? Or so,
yeah,
one-
I mean,
one
even
and
at-
something, one and change.
we're
right
at
now.
1.4 now,
Yeah.
so even at 3.5%, we wouldn't be over the threshold.
If something that cataclysmic happens, then there would be a revolt on Montpelier.
Yeah,
That's just really far away from where we are.
Well, one would think that there would be a revolt on Montpelier right now with making everyone's numbers so low.
Oh, well, we're feeling pretty confident with, like we said, based on what's in thus far and the numbers that we have, we're feeling pretty good. And we've talked directly with Brad James, who is the brains behind, kind of getting to the finish line here. So.
One second, Chip.
good.
Is there going to be any more PowerPoint?
no.
Okay, we can get the lights back on. Great.
Well, do you want me to display the budget book up there, or?
The warning, or?
No, the budget book. We're gonna go through the budget book.
Let's finish with, do you want to do that now, or do you want to get questions and then do that?
Oh, go ahead, take a
Get
question.
questions. But you can turn the lights on, it's okay.
Oh, we can turn the
I
lights.
think there's a happy medium between totally dark and we just have the lights up
Well, it sets
front.
the ambiance, Peter. It's like, it's so relaxing, it's like a lounge. This whole situation's been so relaxing
That's
for
good.
me.
I don't remember what you answered this question last time. How many districts in the state are over this threshold?
So maybe 10.
I think it's around, the last time I checked, it was around 10.
So 10 out of, how many districts are there?
100. You're testing us.
There are
No,
60
I know, I just want a
supervisory
relative,
unions. These are new numbers, because,
Right, all the
The
mergers.
number of
talking
districts that exist is
Act
much fewer
46
oh,
than
it's much fewer,
Yeah.
that's true, okay. I'm
And a lot of
sorry.
these that are over tend to be very small, one-school districts.
Or battling whether they'll be
battling
part
Act
of something.
46,
Yeah.
yep.
Yeah, okay.
Yep.
So it's not very useful, other than a number.
Not really. Other questions, or?
I'm gonna have to study that ratio. That was new to me.
Yeah.
That's not a new,
No.
it's just a newly, you've shown light on it.
Yeah.
Which you had not previously.
I started doing a bunch of research and just realized it's good for people to understand,
Just confuse things.
how this works.
Printed copy.
All right, so are we moving on to more?
I think she was gonna quickly walk through the budget book,
Oh,
just to
great.
orient.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're gonna orient to the budget book now. I need to pull that up.
It's like an awkward, unnecessary sitting.
I'm gonna apologize in advance to those of you who have paper copies of the budget book. It looks like it pulled every other page. It printed every other page for whatever reason, but in the electronic
Maybe I thought there's
version,
gonna be more
it's
questions
complete.
about that.
This is the draft, so we'll get, when we finalize these, it'll print more. It'll print all the pages, not just more, all the pages. Yeah.
I want you to grab the cookie and pass them around.
What's that?
I want you to grab the cookie.
Right, we just wanted to, it's just
Or did you want us to fill in the blanks?
We've just completely fallen apart.
That money.
I'm not sure if anybody else noticed.
Gives you, happy with your taxes, then the next year, then they're like, so,
You know that money?
Even though their business is on the
we're gonna charge you 6% on it, or whatever they charge you.
that would affect. I don't want to do.
Quite rehearsed that one. Victoria didn't have to move.
Yeah,
Besides
I'm
that,
guessing, this is only.
You did a good job staying where you were.
Okay.
Thanks, I did that well.
So the purpose of showing you the budget book right now is not to read it to you because it's like 85 pages and you would be so sick of my voice by the end of it. But maybe I should record it for like a book on tape. Maybe listen to that in the car.
We might fall asleep.
Yeah. So the budget book, we really just want to familiarize you at this point with the format of it. If you haven't seen it before, just to give you a refresher. It will be posted on ACSD's website. Again, I apologize for a little printing snafu. As I said, we were updating right down to the wire those numbers. So that's why we had a little printing issue, but I will display it on the screen. So there's 3 sections to the budget book, and I'll tell you where to go. So there's an introductory section. So if you click on introductory section, and this gives information. This is a lovely picture of you all. It gives some general information about ACSD. There's a message from the superintendent, a message from the board chair. There's an executive summary. We talk a little bit about the budget environment, the overall budget drivers. We also detail our district vision and mission. And we have lots of great pictures. And then if you go to, so we explain a little bit about the budget. What do some of these terms mean? What's your total budget versus your local budget? A lot of the things that we just talked about. And then we give some budget drivers in FY20, so these are the reasons why we have to continue to edit it. We talk about all the things we've talked about, right? Declining enrollment, wages and benefits, all the things we've talked about, our revenue increases, our increase in tuition students. We talk about all that. So it kind of sets the tone. Then in the financial section, this is our year-to-year budget summary, so this looks exactly like, or it should look exactly like, the printout that you got that's double-sided today that has the warning on one side and a summary on the other. So this is aggregated data, this is ACSD as a whole, and it's divided up generally by, large categories: student instruction, universal pre-K, transportation, facilities, things that you would think these are departments, kind of. And then, we also do the FY20 tax calculation. And this explains a little bit about the funding formula, and we give an estimate at the bottom on each town's tax rate. So we do this pretty close to the beginning. This is generally what people want to know. And then we get into great detail about each of the schools. So we go into what we call school cost centers. So we give information where we can about each school individually. So there are certain categories that we have centralized over the course of the past few years, and in some cases even before that, as a result of a state mandate, like special education, transportation, facilities we've centralized, technology we've centralized. But each principal writes a message and tells the community what's been going on in their school. We give some nice pictures, and then there's, if you scroll down one more page, Peter.
Cornwallians, correct?
I don't think it's a real word.
It's not a real word,
Yeah.
but I've
I should
using
add
for
it to my
3.5
dictionary.
years.
Yeah. Cornwallers,
and-
Cornwallers.
Aren't they Cornish?
I mean, I've heard other people in Cornwall.
Oh, they're Cornish. People live in Cornwall.
I think it's good.
Does that
So
mean
if you
that
scroll down one more, just one more
Floridians?
page, I'll just show an example.
Middleburyians?
One more. So this is what some budget detail could look like. It's your FY19 budget, your FY20 proposed, and then there's some notes if there's any major differences. So, for example, I explained that we used to break out our local regular ed portion of special educators, but we're not doing that any longer. If they're regular ed, they're regular ed, so they're in direct instruction. So that's why it's 100% less, right? So we want to explain some of those large variances. In some cases, it's staff turnover. In some cases, it's benefit selection. So we just try to give people some information about why they might see, a 10% or 20% and be concerned about that. And it's a little bit easier to notice in these sort of smaller versions of the budget. Obviously, it takes a lot more to move 1% on 22 million when you look at the aggregated, student instruction than it does to 650,000.
What's meant by fund transfers to food service?
So that's the local portion. All of the rural schools, I'll say for lack of a better term, have had to subsidize their food service program. So they run an in-house food service program, whereas the Middlebury schools contract out. And so the state does not allow us to run that at a deficit. So what that means is that we're not making enough from our sales to students and our income from free and reduced lunch and things like that to cover the cost. So that has to be subsidized by the general fund. Yes.
Is part of that reason, I know as a parent, I get a letter about, what the food cost is going to be each year, and is part of that because that food cost is mandated federally, so they can't charge more to help cover those costs?
There's a little bit of that. So there is it's called a paid lunch equity tool. So there's a formula that we have to run it through. So they actually make us increase it by a certain amount if it doesn't reach a certain threshold, but then we obviously have to think about affordability for students, and we don't want to be increasing lunch prices, 50 cents in 1 year, for example, because that could really be cost prohibitive. So it's a little bit of both.
And over the years, we've aligned all of our food prices across schools. So when we first unified and pre-unification, we had numbers that were pretty different school to school, and so those numbers have equalized.
Did that maybe contribute to why some of the schools need a greater increase to compensate for the deficit?
These deficits, we've always been running deficits, so this is not a new thing.
Yeah.
It's not new. It's just, as wages and benefits increase for the people who are doing great work, by the way, working really hard and providing really quality meals for our kids. As those things increase, then we have to increase as well. So some of it's playing a little bit of catch up on that type of thing. And then if you go down on the outline here to special education,
I could eat there every day.
so each school has a section just like that, a message from the principal, and then some more detailed information about their budget. And then we get into sort of the centralized areas, so special education, and there's a message from Vicki on there. And we also have some, trying to find one. You scroll down to page 56, Peter.
Boy, I'm never gonna catch
This is the Board of Ed, so.
strategy.
Oh, it's perfect. So this is Board of Education. So we also include some graphics, where appropriate, to show where our spending is going. We talked about this before. I showed you this graphic where most of what we consider Board of Education spending is our insurances, our workers' comp or multi-line insurance, things like that. And we have one of those areas for district office administration, facilities, transportation. I'll go through each one. And then on the outline, Peter, we have grant fund summary and detail. So this is where we give taxpayers more information about what is not funded by taxes. So grants, what we use our grants for. We give some estimations on where we're going to end this year. And we explain kind of how the grant system works a little bit. So we get an allocation and then we get a finalized allocation in the spring. So our final numbers take a little bit longer to suss out. But this year, we're basically rolling. So we're expecting similar allocations to previous years. And then the last section is the informational section. And this gives some historical information on our district, and this will grow over time as we get more of a robust history and more robust data. So we have quite a few charts here that show, you know, the CLA tax rates by town, the tax rates by town, post CLA and pre-CLA. Could not get that out. And then we have, you know, just some information about how the tax rates have changed over time, how our enrollment has changed over time. This also has some information from that's information that was presented at the community forum about our actual and projected enrollment. And then we also have some staffing ratios and demographic data. The demographic data stops, it only goes every 10 years, and I think that's related to census. So in 2020, we'll add more, so that's essentially the same data as last year. And then enrollment. So that's the budget book in a nutshell. And as I said, some things still need to be updated, some proofreading still needs to be done. But I would ask, you know, that we actually have on our timeline to approve this or to have it in final form on February 4th. So if between now and then you could look at this, and if you see something that doesn't really make sense or you think needs to be clarified, or if you just have a question about it, if you could email Peter so that he can pass that along to me, and then I can bring you a final product on our first meeting in February, and I'll have some printed versions with all the pages. Yes.
This is the summary and the public information. When you are, as a business manager, you are looking at each one of these categories under a different code. They're broken out,
Yes.
correct?
Yeah.
So if in fact someone wanted to see the budget, okay, which is the way we used to either have it like that or otherwise, there were all these multiple codes with
Right.
many different numbers, it would break it out. This is much easier to understand, obviously,
Right.
but in fact, that's the way it would always come out. So how much is for art supplies, okay?
Right.
And how much for athletic officials, stuff like that. That's all, someone can come in and ask you that question,
Sure.
and you can direct them for that.
Absolutely.
So, I'm just making the point because we've done it this way a lot, and it's just a very different perspective. I think this is much more useful than that.
Yeah.
But that, in fact, we used to have maybe a couple pages of something in these bigger categories and not a full sort of educational rendition. Then you had this voluminous budget with thousands of codes.
Right, that you couldn't possibly, yeah.
You know, one would be a high school code, one would be, this is back before unification, but I
Yeah.
mean, that was the way everybody was doing it.
Well, and that process focused people on a very granular level, which in some ways looks like it's really transparent, but it actually obfuscated more than it illuminated.
I'm not advocating.
Yeah, no, I know, I'm just adding on to what you're saying. is
Right.
I think the way we're presenting it now provides more leverage for someone from the public to really understand where the money's being spent, how we're spending it, what our vision is, and to be able to weigh in on that in a different way than before, when we had two people coming and fine-tooth comb, finding two little things to talk about in the meeting, but never talking about what's our vision, where are we headed, what do we really care about, like those things kind of never came up. So.
But it does come up in years when we're either adding or subtracting a lot of, particularly personnel,
Right.
programs, athletic teams, I don't care, whatever those are the types of things which at times make up the finite numbers, right? So, I mean, that's why people will focus on that. This year, we're not doing any of that.
And I think in years where we're going to break, when if, you know, if there is a reduction and it's in a certain area, that's where we provide more detail to say, this is an area we've determined based on where we sit, where equalized pupil is, this is an area that we think needs reduction, and here's some more detail to describe kind of how that is going to play out in terms of the reduction.
As we start talking about, our efforts with regards to the facilities planning and the community dialogues and thinking about this as a district as opposed to as a town perspective, and then we look at this process from a budget perspective, how will, or is there a reaction where we're seeing towns and their tax rate and the variance there? Is that going to be interpreted as, well, I'm paying more into this system because my tax rate is X? And someone from a town Y sees their tax rate as Z. How do we reconcile those two messages?
I'm not sure, I wouldn't use the term reconciliation maybe.
Okay.
I think there was a lot of concern going into unification that Middlebury, which had the elementary school with the lowest per pupil cost, would carry more of the unification weight. So I think that was a concern that was voiced as we moved through the unification process. I think as we move forward and as we look at, and I tried to talk about, as we look at the overall budget, most towns were actually sharing most of the cost. When you look at the percentage of a $38 million budget, most of the towns were carrying moms in the high school, which are the biggest chunk of our budget. So the impact, a $1 million budget and an impact on a $38 million budget, in terms of the overall, and what we've seen, for example, in Middlebury with the tax rate, we haven't seen a significant increase. So some places have seen that, we haven't. So I think my sense, and I'm not sure I'm part of every conversation out there for sure, but my sense is that it's a concern moving forward, but it's not a concern, a significant concern right now, because our tax rate in Middlebury has not gone from where it was and hasn't shot up. I think if that did happen, then that would bring back those concerns. I don't know if I answered your question.
No, I guess my question is, how are we thinking about, and I might be interpreting this incorrectly, but when we talk about towns and we see different tax rates, are people going to interpret that as, I'm contributing something different based upon where I live to an overall budget?
So the answer to that is the tax rates are in fact all the same. There's a one ACSD tax rate. It changes town by town depending on whether they've done a good job of keeping their grand list current. So when they talk about the CLA, what that really means is your grand list up to date with the market? So if you're at a 95% CLA like Cornwall, what they're really saying is you have undervalued the total value of the property in your town, and therefore, you need to multiply or divide by 0.95. Mm-hmm. If everybody was perfect and we all had 100% CLA, the ACSD tax rate would be the same everywhere.
Everywhere.
Yeah.
And I think that's the message. At the end of the day, when we're trying to figure out, what are the things that people need to understand, I think it's going to be important for folks to really understand why I look at it here and I see this tax rate of difference that's applied at the town level,
Yeah.
but then I have this district tax rate, and what does that really mean to me? I think that comes off a little bit.
And actually, since we've unified, it's one of the first times I've seen where we're actually saying this is what the district tax rate is.
Exactly.
Which we
We have
hadn't
to kind
done
of-
years ago.
And that's why I think I use the word reconcile, reconcile
Okay.
those two different numbers, and how do we help people understand what that means?
Yeah. It's a little bit different than, some SDs are just one town, right? So it's Burlington, or
Right.
it's Rutland City. So they don't have that extra element. We do have a little bit more explaining to do, and I think, right, it's important to emphasize.
Exactly
That's
why
part of the
there's
reason.
variance there.
That's part of the reason, and we need to do more of it, but part of the reason for going through the funding formula today in more detail.
This issu's been around for years, so
I
a
can
lot of people
imagine.
are
Yeah.
fairly familiar with it, but it's really complicated. And, yeah.
I'm going to sit unless anybody has.
Anyway.
I just, I have a question about the enrollment section, which I find helpful from a current and historic perspective. I'm just wondering, I felt like in the past we showed at least the 1-year projection by grade by school, so we could get a sense of if there are any dramatic shifts predicted that could affect budgeting. I didn't know if that was purposefully not in this, or if it's just coming and not quite ready yet.
I think we just included the total, but not, we could certainly add that. We have that.
Sorry, I'm still. Any other questions? So our job, if I'm not mistaken, is that we need to adopt this budget for the warning. Present the vote. While this says approve the budget, we're really adopting it. Well, use whatever terminology we want, but anyway, we need to approve a number to put before the voters. So,
Do you want to walk through the warning first?
why don't we walk through the warning first?
Brittany, do you have that up? I handed out all my copies. Oh, here, I've got it here. Does everyone see the warning?
Is it on the board pack too?
Yeah.
It is. It's the warning for the Australian ballot.
Yeah.
Anybody need a paper copy?
So the first article, Article 1,
Yeah.
note Bridport now is open at 7 a.m., right?
Oh, supposed to be.
That's what I've heard. Okay, so that's a
They
change.
were open at 7 in the fall. So.
Yeah, that's a nice change. So Article 1 is the total budget number.
Annual meeting.
Did we skip number 2? Are we on number 3? I'm sorry. I didn't realize we were moved on.
We moved on
We have not
to,
adopted the budget yet.
so we're doing the warnings
I'm just
first.
talking about the warning. I'm just presenting. We haven't looked
Right,
at
but
the
did we do
warning
number
yet.
2, the
No.
memo? We're skipping that?
We're skipping it for now. We're going over the
Okay,
warnings.
now we're on the warning. Okay, sorry.
Just before we put forth the budget, just wanted to go over the warning.
Here.
So we have Article 1, which is shall the voters of Addison Central School District vote to authorize the ACSD School Board to expend $37,794,916, which is amount the ACSD School Board has determined to be necessary for the ensuing fiscal year. It's estimated that this proposed budget, if approved, will result in ed spending of $17,473.81 per equalized pupil. This projected spending per equalized pupil is 3.35% higher than spending for the current year. This is language that's required by statute. It was added about 3 years ago, I think. Article 2, shall the voters of the Addison Central School District vote to authorize the ACSD School Board to appropriate $123,801 of the FY18 unassigned fund balance estimated at that amount to the ACSD Capital Reserve Fund. So this is something we talked about in our first draft. And then Article 3, to elect 5 school directors from the nominees to serve on the Addison Central School District Board. 3 who are residents of Middlebury, 1 Ripton, and 1 Weybridge. So that's the warning information.
And is everybody clear on the 123,801 figure, where that comes from, in case you get asked?
The question I have, and this election of school directors, as it's delineated, is that the way it was last year too? Did we have the warning last year?
I believe so, yeah. Yep,
I think so.
Okay.
yeah. This is boilerplate.
This is, and it's also statute for where they have to live to be.
Well, I know that, but if in a warning you're saying you're electing board people and then there's a vote for those board people, it just doesn't make sense to me, I guess.
In terms of the sequence?
Or the verbiage.
Well, yeah, I mean, I'm not questioning it, I guess it seems it's duplicating, isn't it? I mean, would be like saying we're gonna vote for president and we're gonna have part of the warning that we're gonna vote for president, okay? So,
I think this is essentially, we're warning what you're going to be, what's going to be on the ballot.
So do you think it should just say to elect 5 school directors to serve on the Addison Central School District?
No, because right now, the way it's by our own statute, right, there has to be so many from each
Right.
place.
No, I meant just that first sentence, and then have it break out. So the first sentence would just
No,
say,
I'm not questioning that.
Okay.
I guess I was more asking whether this
Yeah.
is something that we're doing every year now.
Yes.
Because on the ballot itself, the school directors it'll say, vote for no more than whatever, or.
1, 2, yep,
And
yep.
it'll be delineated that way.
Yep.
We haven't had huge numbers of people running for these different positions from different towns. So if you had 4 running for the one spot who's representing Cornwall, it would say, over those 4 names, you can only vote for 1. All of us can only vote for 1, correct?
Correct.
yes.
Presumably, because we had to
Yes.
get signatures
Yep.
from
Yes, that
across
is
the
correct.
district. Okay.
No wonder the counting takes so much longer than it used to.
Brittany, do you know why in Article 1, why the total amount is not the ed spending amount, but the total budget amount?
We have to warn our total expense.
Yeah.
It's-
Okay.
That's always been the way.
I'm just wondering what the budgetary
Yeah,
rationale
I
is.
thought that local ed spending was usually broken, you had the total, and then local ed spending was broken out, but
We
maybe.
used to have to warn the percent increase of expenditures over the prior year.
Okay.
Now it's been spending for less people.
All right. All right.
That was a shift the legislature made to try to highlight that you can keep your budget flat, but if you're losing students,
Yep.
that there's an increase even though you can't see it,
Yeah.
budget to budget.
Yeah. All right, so I think the first order of business is a motion to approve the budget amount of 30. Did you have any issues with the language in terms of
No.
or anything?
No.
Do you want a motion?
We're giving people a chance to read through it first.
Did you?
Found something, they're done.
Okay.
Change to student.
So you're saying, so they know it was a student who did it?
Not just some random person.
Right.
Everybody okay? So how about a motion to approve the resolution? And I did a little research on resolutions, and the reason you do one is that you feel strongly enough about something that you want it, committed to the record. Anyway, I'd like to, the motion to have it, to approve this pending any typographical corrections.
I'll move it.
I'll second.
All right, if there's nothing further, then all those in favor of approving the resolution, say aye.
Aye.
Anybody opposed? Anybody abstaining? Excellent.
Thanks for doing that.
Do you want to let them know what it's about?
Oh, I'm sorry, I thought everybody had. I assume you all know what we're doing, so.
Just resolve, like, get rid of all
It's a good thing.
At our last,
Dunkin' Donut Day.
at our last meeting, Jen asked the question if there was some way we could publicly express our gratitude toward all of the work of the police department, of all the folks at MUMS, the administration, and also the young people who sort of helped deal with and potentially avert a crisis over at MUMS. And so this is a sort of resolution stating that.
You can read my computer later if you want. You can see what it says.
Well, we've reached the end of our agenda, so I'd also welcome a motion to adjourn. Something else?
I think think that's it.
Okay.
Something's stuck in my brain, but yeah. I think
Who
we're good.
made the motion to adjourn?
Oh, I think that was Victoria.
Okay.
All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Anybody opposed? Thank you all very much. We stand adjourned until the first Monday in February.
Okay.